Hi everyone, it's Keira and welcome back to my channel and welcome to a brand new F-Series video. As you may be aware, but if you aren't aware, we are a group of female Formula 1 and motorsport content creators here on YouTube, and we make YouTube videos, and we've also, just a quick plug, I've now started Twitter, so go and follow that will be linked down below. But yes, welcome to another episode of F-Series. I guess we call it F-Series Discuss. And today we are going to be discussing whether Carlos Sainz is going to be good for Ferrari. Now, there was a lot of talk about this like back in July type of time, but it kind of faded out and nobody's really spoken about it. I don't think anyone's really thinking about it anymore, but I do think we need to be starting to talk about this, because is Carlos Sainz going to be good for Ferrari? We know that Ferrari are on a downward spiral. We know that it's going to be a good couple of years until they come back up, but can Carlos Sainz alongside Charles Leclerc turn things around for Ferrari? Now, the first question is literally just going to be plain and simple. Do you think this is a good idea from Ferrari or not? One of you start, don't mind who.
Are we talking from Ferrari or from
just in
Carlos?
general, do you think this was a good decision for Formula 1? For anybody? For Carlos, for Ferrari, for both?
For everyone in the sport.
For everyone. For Chase Carey, for Ross Brawn.
So I think for Mr. Ferrari, So I think for Ferrari it was actually quite a good decision. Obviously with Seb at the minute it's not quite gone to plan, and I definitely think it was time for them to mix their lineup up, and I think Carlos was a really good obvious choice for this. He is on the up, and I think it would have been so close between him and Daniel and Ricciardo as to who was maybe going to get that seat, and I think for Ferrari it's a good decision. They've got someone who's kind of got that experience. They've got Carlos is kind of now really competitive, and I think he's got a lot that he can bring to that team in terms of also he's got that bit of experience, so we'll know for testing and stuff. So I think it is a good decision from Ferrari.
Yeah, I agree as well, because obviously he is a really good driver, so for him to sort of replace Seb and try and get them back up to where they should be, because I don't think any of us expected to see Ferrari be this bad this season. So I do think it was a good move for Ferrari. Obviously, I know he's at McLaren right now, and this season it hasn't been bad this season, but he hasn't had the best luck, but he is a really good driver, so I do think he will slot quite nicely into that team and try and build them back up with Charles. I don't know how long he'll be there, because obviously you've got Mick coming into the sport, but for right now I think Carlos was probably the best choice to replace Seb.
See, I'm kind of on the fence about it. So I think in terms of Carlos Sainz being the driver they signed, I think it was a good decision. He was a lot more affordable than Daniel Ricciardo. I think also kind of for the team kind of setup, he'd probably be an easier fit, even though I would argue that Daniel and Charles probably would have had a more harmonious relationship. I think Carlos would provide that level of kind of quality that they need, but I don't think he's going to be record breaking. However, for me, I think dropping Seb, as much as I love him, was the right decision to make. I think ultimately every story has to come to an end. However, I would argue that multi-year deal was not the best decision they made, because if you look, for example, likely it is, could even be as soon as the German Grand Prix, it'll probably be announced that Mick Schumacher is going to drive for Alfa Romeo next year. You've also got the likelihood of Callum Ilott coming up, Robert Schwartzman, although probably not Robert Schwartzman this year. If you have either Mick or Callum have a stellar drive in their rookie season, in the same way Charles had, you're going to have a rookie driver stuck in a team and they'll have to wait another season to get promoted. Also, you could have it that Carlos gets in that Ferrari and bombs and is just atrocious and doesn't fit well in the team, doesn't fit in the culture, and you've stuck with him for another year. I would argue if you're giving him to have a chance in a bigger team, I would argue a 1 year deal was more sensible. And I would also argue that Carlos, as much as there is always going to be a prestige to drive for Ferrari, everyone wants to win the championship, but only a select number of drivers will ever get to drive for Ferrari, and there's no kind of greater honour in the sport. They're kind of one of the few teams that very much Formula One is their DNA. It's what makes them what they are. However, he is now signed for Ferrari, and look what's happened with McLaren. They have gone up, and overall, I think Carlos maybe should have waited to see what happened with the season, because to be honest, we didn't know if we were going to get racing at all this year. However, now that we have, he's going to be stuck in probably a midfield team for the next 2 years.
Yeah, I think I'm on a very similar path to Hannah, where I don't think a multi-year deal was the best thing Ferrari could do. I mean, now we look at it with all the Formula 2 boys coming up, we're expecting to have Schumacher within the Alfa Romeo seat, and we're expecting to have Callum be in that Haas seat. And I think we'll be very surprised if anything other than that starts to happen at this point. Ferrari, I think, a lot of the time, have struggled to look towards their long-term goals, and this is the first time where we've seen Ferrari do something really quite different. You tend to see Ferrari go for the more experienced drivers, so to take someone like Carlos, who, yes, he has quite a few years in Formula 1, but not that much success when we talk about wins and podiums, etc., and then partner him with Charles, who is just going into his 3rd year. It's such a young lineup and very un-Ferrari. Now, when you look at Ferrari with their junior drivers coming up, it seems like it's going to get younger and younger, and they're going to want Schumacher in that seat as soon as possible. And we have no idea if Mick will do something very similar to Charles in his first year, where he impressed so much when he was in that Sauber that after 1 year in the sport, he went straight up. So I think multi-year deal, no. We should have stuck with the 1 year deal, especially when Charles has such a long deal into the future. Bless his soul. But yeah, I think Carlos was the right choice for now, but I think they'll be kicking themselves later, but I'm pretty sure they'll probably have a clause in there somewhere that means they can get Carlos out sooner rather than later.
I am on the fence as well, a little bit like Hannah. I can see some pros and some cons. I think probably looking at their development programme with the drivers they've got coming up, it wouldn't have been the decision I would have made personally. Because Carlos is a feisty driver. He's a young driver, he's a feisty driver, and he wants this. And he's not just going to become a second driver to Charles. So they may have a situation which they don't want. I'm hoping not, but they could have. But in a way, I kind of also see why maybe they've done a multi-deal, because Mick Schumacher is known for taking a couple of years to get into a series. He's done it in F3 and he's done it in F2, so he will probably do it in F1 as well. So maybe they're giving Mick just 2 years just to develop in Alfa Romeo. So anyway, moving on to the next one is... Oh, my Siri's going off. Do apologise. She always talks to me. I don't even ask her to talk to me, but she does. Moving on to the next point, which is now Carlos Sainz fits in really well with McLaren. We know McLaren are literally like a family. Him and Lando get on really well. You can see, I don't know if anybody watches McLaren Unboxed, but you get such a great insight into the goings on on the Grand Prix weekends with McLaren. And Carlos, I just see him fits in really well with McLaren, and he's a really good teammate and he's a really good team member. We know that Ferrari are a very different team to a lot of other teams like Mercedes and McLaren. Do you girls think that he is going to fit in the way he has at McLaren? Obviously not exactly the way, because I know that McLaren are different, but do you think he's going to fit into the team, or do you think he's going to feel on edge? Because Ferrari are known for, you know, making some drivers feel on edge. Do you feel like he'll fit in, or do you feel like he won't?
That's actually like it's like quite a hard question to answer, because I feel like he will fit in with them, but it will take time, because obviously he's going from McLaren, who we all know, literally, like you said, are like a family. Like in the Unbox, you see that Carlos spends most of his time in Lando's room. Like, do you know what I mean? So like,
yeah.
like they are genuine friends, and I think that's really nice and really important in the team dynamic to have, because yes, they are competitive with each other, and as we saw in the Russian GP with Lando over the radio when Carlos obviously crashed, like there's obviously there is some tension there, because they are both competitive drivers, but they do get on so well, and the team just all get on so well. So I think when he goes to Ferrari, it will be a bit of like a culture shock. Like he's gone from one extreme to another, but I do think that he'll fit in. I just don't know. I don't know, because Charles is obviously their priority. Like he's got that massive multi-year deal, so he won't be on level peggings like that, and that's not going to happen. So that might automatically create tension from the get-go, because like you've all seen in like not even just in McLaren on box, but like Drive to Survive, you see how feisty Carlos is and how much he wants to win and is in it for himself. I just don't know how that's going to come across in a Ferrari when you're clearly just a number 2 driver when you join.
I think it's going to be a massive shock to Carlos. Reason being is he's already moved away from the Red Bull family, which I think, looking on the grid, I would argue is maybe the closest to Ferrari in sort of the way like it's structured and the way, at least from a viewer's perspective, it appears, where it's quite cutthroat. It's very like it's a massive deal if you drive for Red Bull, not as much as Ferrari, of course, but that move that Carlos has made from Toro Rosso and the Red Bull family to Renault and then to McLaren, where he's been welcomed into this family and he's been a really integral part of rebuilding McLaren. I think the move over to Ferrari will be a really big shock because suddenly the team isn't going to be built around him, because McLaren at the moment is built around him and Lando together because they are a family. He's going to move to Ferrari and that's very much already Charles's team. So I think Carlos isn't going to go down without a fight. Carlos, like Keira said, is a very, very feisty driver. We saw in Monza when he was P2 and he said, I want this win. He wasn't going to settle for P2 because he knew that win was on the cards, that he could possibly get it. So I think there's possibilities for some tension, for some teammate rivalry going on there, which would be quite good actually, because I don't think we've really seen that as much the past couple of years. We've not seen as much tension. There was that little bit with Charles and Seb last year, but really it was just kind of like, nah, I want a little bit more drama. So for me, I hope that he shows that he's more than a number 2 driver and make Ferrari actually go, hang on, let's think about this and do the best they can, because there's been too many times Ferrari have just thrown results or championships away because they've just not got their driver situation right. I am going to follow on from Beth's point there and say that I think Carlos has a really good opportunity here, knowing that the FDA drivers are coming up, Mick's coming up. He has a really good, say, 2-year opportunity when he can go in all guns blazing in a car which, well, for 2022 they're saying they're going to be back on the pace, and if he goes in and just fights and he knows that he's got this such a short period of time when he could absolutely smash it, could he be world champion? Like, if he turns his brain on and kind of Charles knows he's there long term, he could maybe just sit back a bit. He knows he's got years, but Carlos has this great opportunity. And if he really, really focuses and just gets sorted in that team next year in 2021, see in 22 if they can get that car around him. And I'm not saying around him, I'm just saying get that car for both of those drivers. I think it could be a really, really interesting fight.
I think one thing I will also say as well is that the thing is, like Donnie was saying, he's got 2 years to really fully go for it. And I want anyone with actual F1 knowledge to tell me, but with people who are in Ferrari, do they tend to, if when they leave Ferrari, do they leave the sport like straight away, or is it very common that they end up finding a seat elsewhere? Because if that is the case, they end up finding a seat elsewhere. Really, Carlos has got absolutely nothing to lose. He might as well go all out and show as much as he can, because if there is that thing is, you've driven for Ferrari, you are a good driver, because otherwise Ferrari never would have considered you, then he's still going to have a career later on in the sport. So, well, you're talking Alonso, Seb,
I was going to
Kimi.
say, yeah, and you're looking at like Massa and all that, they've all kind of found somewhere else. Whether it went well afterwards is another story, but they did find somewhere else. So I don't think it would be over, especially for Carlos, who's younger. But anyway, that was good points. That kind of moves on to the next question, which is kind of similar. Now, obviously, he has this alpha role at McLaren. He kind of brought up Lando last year, got him to, you know, doing his stuff. As much as Lando, obviously we know Lando did bring the charge on last year, Carlos is that alpha role. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's a really healthy alpha role, and I think he has carried that on into this year, and I think that's what works really well with McLaren. Obviously, I think it's going to be a different story when he goes to Ferrari, but do you think he can carry on that alpha role, and do you think that, you know, roles could reverse and Charles could become not a number 2, but maybe just the less dominant force? Because we are so quick to see at Ferrari where they go, this person's going to be number one, this person's going to be number two. They aren't very good at kind of balancing out their drivers. I don't know why, but they just don't seem to be able to have equal drivers, and not sure why. But do you think Matteo Binotto is going to go into next year saying he's number one, he's number two, and then we're going to have a situation with Seb and Charles again where we've got a little bit of a pickle? So do you think Carlos can carry on this alpha role, or do you think he literally will slip down to a number two driver?
See, for me, I don't think Matteo Binotto is directly going to come out and say he's number one driver.
He done it last time though.
But I would argue that, to be honest, the Seb situation is kind of a bit different in that Seb was kind of with the team for so long. I would argue that for them, they're going to kind of... I think Matteo Binotto's learnt from his mistakes, or has hopefully learnt from his mistakes. And even though it won't directly be a number one, number two driver, and it'll be very obvious, I would argue it's probably going to be more psychological than anything else. For me, Carlos is a placeholder in that seat. He is there until one of the Ferrari Academy drivers gets promoted. And there'll be little things. The one thing I've always noticed with Ferrari, and it's the thing that, to be honest, makes them quite similar to Red Bull, is there is that level of psychological pressure. You perform or you get out. Look at Seb, 4 times world champion. For years was seen as the wonder child of the sport. Look how, in the space of a couple of weeks, maybe a season, his reputation has basically been tarnished. Ultimately, Ferrari will make or break drivers. Even if drivers go and find places elsewhere, they're never really able to regain their reputation in the same way. Unless Seb goes and wins a world championship at Aston Martin, he's never going to be able to get to the level of prestige he was previously. And so for me, I think the Carlos-Charles relationship is ultimately going to fit into that number one, number two driver setup, but it won't be obvious at first. I think at first they'll try and keep it fairly even to see, because it could be that Carlos gets in that car and absolutely beats Charles. And even though Charles has a long-term contract, there is always ways of breaking it. But for me, I think the psychological pressure of Ferrari, that environment, will ultimately break Carlos, and that will decide who's number one and number two driver. Carlos won't necessarily always be, I don't think he'll be able to meet the pressure, meet the expectations, and ultimately that will spell out more of their futures within the team than any kind of preset notion of one of them being top dog.
I just think that it's very clear from the get-go that Charles is number one man, so I just don't think that Carlos will be going in there as anywhere like near an equal party, because literally, like, the way that we've seen Charles become number one when Seb is there, like, it's Sebastian Vettel, you know, like 4-time world champion. Like, I just think that, like, I do agree with you, Hannah, like the psychological fact that Carlos is probably thinking, oh my god, I'm going from a team where I'm basically am number one and fighting for that number one, but I'm going to go to Ferrari, and it's like, I know I'm not going to be number one from the get-go because Charles is very clearly number one. I just don't think, unless he puts in amazing performances in the first couple of races, I just don't think that he'll ever be the alpha at Ferrari.
Yeah, I agree with Charlotte. I definitely think Charles is the number one, and Carlos is going into that team knowing that, he knows that. And I think Carlos is really going to have to work and absolutely bring it for race on race on race if he has any chance of entering 2022 on level playing fields where he will be able to compete at the same level, because there's already speculation at the minute of are Carlos and Seb in the same car. Like, the discrepancy between those two cars is surely more than just driver error, is it? Like, so are we going to have a situation like that where Carlos is arguably got a bit of a disadvantage as well? I definitely do think Charles is going to be number one, but I definitely think Carlos could try and push this if he really switches his mind on.
I have a conspiracy theory. So let's all put our little tinfoil hats on, because this is my conspiracy theory for this year. I think that because the team is built around Charles more, because he's the number one, he's the one that he's signed the forever long contract for, I think, oh, I'm going to make myself sound so dumb. I think that the car is built around Charles, and I think Charles necessarily is not experienced enough to be able to help the team produce a good car. Now, I'm not saying this is all Charles's fault. He's the reason why the Ferrari car is awful this year. What I'm saying, right? Okay, so naturally, when you've got a car and you're a driver, you drive in and you have to. Oh my god! Right, no. Hear me out. You're driving. You have to give back feedback. You have to be able to give the right feedback so they're able to develop the car. Ferrari naturally have got a bad car to begin with. That's very, very clear. And Charles is the one that's doing better in this car, which in my brain, the car is built for Charles. And he is the one offering all the development notes, and he's just developing the car in the wrong direction and developing the car for him. So when we're like, wow, how's Charles like getting a P2 out of this absolute dog for the car? It's because the car is built for him. I think people very much overlook this because it's not the same extent as Max at Red Bull. But I think that's the case. Anyway, regardless of that.
Beth, do you want me to keep this in whilst I'm editing?
Yes, keep this in. This is Beef's
my video.
This is Beef's conspiracy theory corner. That's what's happening here. Regardless,
I agree
think
with Beth and the tinfoil
because
hat.
of this, it's going to be really, really difficult for Carlos to make sure that he's on the same level playing field as Charles very, very quickly, because I genuinely think that car is built more around Charles than we actually think. So, like you all say, I think Carlos is going to have to pull his finger out and really get to grips with that car very, very quickly, no matter how rubbish it is, because otherwise all the development is going to carry on going towards Charles, a car for Charles, until Carlos can then make way for Mick, who will come through. And that's the end of Beef's conspiracy theory.
Right, thanks
I'll
for that.
agree with you there, Beth.
I wouldn't say the car was built around him. I think if you look at the actual characteristics of the car, I don't think it's to do with Charles. I think they just got it wrong, and I think they are in a bit of a pickle. I wouldn't blame it on Charles. It literally sounds like you're blaming Charles for Ferrari's downfall, which
It's just my wee little
is hard.
conspiracy theory. We're going to allow it.
Oh my god. Okay, anyway, so to round up, I'm going to ask you guys a final question, which is, do you think that Carlos can help bring Ferrari back up, or do you think he's just going to become part of the furniture? Do you think he's got a big enough impact as a driver and as a person to be able to fight with Ferrari and bring them back up, or do you just think he's going to be that kind of middle stone before Mick Schumacher? Do you think he can actually build Ferrari up, especially with these new regs? He's going to be there for 2022. Can he build Ferrari up and get them in like a positive mental attitude and actually have a car that can win again? Because we all want to see Ferrari back on the top step.
Yes. Everything that I've just said, but I'm going to say yes. Reason being is because Ferrari are not stupid. They know how great a driver Carlos is, and I think they've been able to see that his time at McLaren, he has been a very integral part of McLaren going from the absolute awful mess it was to where we see it today, where it's just getting better and better and better. And I think they're going to respect Carlos for that and realise, if he wasn't necessarily within McLaren, would McLaren have had this success? Because they would have arguably had Lando and then maybe Stoffel still. That could have happened, and Carlos was able to bring this experience and help build this team up. So I think Carlos is going to be a very, very integral part to Ferrari coming back. However, it's whether Ferrari want him to, and whether Ferrari want to give him the roles, the tools and the resources to be able to help Ferrari get back to where it is. And we know what Ferrari is like. They make all of the wrong decisions. So if Ferrari don't improve, for me, it's on Ferrari.
Quick. Someone say something.
I agree with Beth. I agree with Beth as well. I think if Ferrari give him, like what Beth said, the right car, the right tools, like he can perform in a car, like he can perform in a bad car. So I do think that he could help them get back to the top. But I also can't help but think that he is just like, I don't know, like he's just there before Mick is ready to fill that seat, and I can't get that thought out of my head, and it hurts me because I know like how well he fits in with McLaren. So I'm like, I know everyone wants to race for Ferrari, like everyone wants to race for the team in red. I understand that, but I just can't help but think that he's literally in that seat. He's warming that seat up for Mick when he comes up. That's literally all I can think. But for them 2 years that he has got, like Dawny's been saying, if he does really go for it and Ferrari does give him a decent car to work with, I think he can help him get back to the top.
I don't know. I don't know if it's disagree, but Carlos, yes, he's a good driver. Yes, he has really helped with the McLaren redemption or build back up. But I just don't think that anyone can fix Ferrari at the minute. Like, Seb's not being able to fix them, Massa's not, Kimi, however, and then you're trying to put Carlos in there who...
No.
Does he have a win yet? No.
No.
And, giving him 2 years as a seat filler, he's not really going to be given the opportunity to achieve much as I've said. If he goes out and fights and track, there's the potential and there's so much opportunity, but I really don't think it's going to come to fruition. And the 2 year time period he's got, I just don't think it's going to balance out, and I don't think he's going to be their saving grace.
See, for me, I think it's dependent on a multitude of factors and not just on Carlos himself. So I think firstly is when he gets to Ferrari, if he wants to help build that team up, he has to ingrain himself in the culture of the team. Very much, if you look at him at McLaren, kind of bonded with the team, was able to build it up, but also because he had that level of experience and knowledge. I would argue the way McLaren is now and the way that the team have bounced back, yes, has partly contributed by Lando, but I would argue Carlos was probably more of an integral factor in it, in the fact that he had the experience in the car, and Carlos will need to ingrain himself in the culture. If you compare, for example, the way Seb was at Ferrari, Seb learned Italian, lived there most of the year, bonded, and very much found a family within the team and tried to do what Michael Schumacher did. Whereas Kimi didn't care. Kimi was there to drive the car, and that is it, and that's Kimi's way. But if Carlos goes and does something similar and doesn't do what he did at McLaren and make himself integral to the team, I can't see him having any impact. There's been a decline in Ferrari's kind of quality, the same way they portray themselves. They were very stilted for so many years. You couldn't do media appearances, things like that. Ferrari have a way of doing things, and the problem is that formula that they have doesn't work anymore. Ferrari don't adapt to change or overcome things in the same way other teams do, and ultimately that I think will be more harmful for Ferrari in the long run. Ferrari need a culture change, and to be honest, I think that's bigger than Charles, bigger than Carlos, and that comes from not just the Formula One team,
yeah,
but Ferrari
so
as a
those
business.
were our thoughts. I have really enjoyed this chat, girls. Thank you so much for coming on and talking about Carlos. Again, as I said at the start of this video, we have got a brand new Twitter account that we are now running. It is at FSeries__. Please go and follow us on Twitter. We will be there pretty much every single day. Actually, for sure every single day, probably too much every single day. We're doing takeovers, we're doing polls, we're just waffling basically, and we are loving it so far. So if you did enjoy this video, please follow us all. I will leave all the girls' links in the description box. I will leave the Twitter, and I will leave the playlist as well to watch other videos. We have done videos for months now, so yeah, if you did enjoy it, please do subscribe to my channel as well. And yeah, thank you girls for joining me, and thank you for watching. Please like this video, and as I said, all the links will be in the description box. But yeah, thank you for watching. Goodbye.